A great economy car. A car with more room with the rear seat folded down than the trunk of a Cadillac Fleetwood. Where is it written that that kind of a car shouldn't be a ball to drive?
Back in 1975, Volkswagen started importing a new subcompact hatchback to North America in an attempt to win back sales lost by the declining interest in their former best-selling car, the Beetle. Known as the Golf everywhere else, in North America it was called the Rabbit, and it later became the first German car built in the United States. This is the story of the Volkswagen Rabbit. This is my old car.
You did it again, didn't you?
Volkswagen Rabbit. You've got to drive it to believe it.
Thanks for the many suggestions to review the Volkswagen Rabbit, as well as several other VW models. I hope to do more VW model reviews in the future. If you ask anyone who has little to no interest in cars what they think of when you say the name Volkswagen, it probably wouldn't be the Rabbit, but instead most likely it would be the Beetle. Almost everybody recognizes the Beetle, as it became the poster child of 1960s peace and love, which is ironic considering it was originally built at the request of Adolf Hitler, the last person anyone would associate with peace and love. But that's a story for a possible future My Old Car episode. Although exports of the Beetle to the United States had risen as high as 423,000 cars by 1968, American sales dropped quickly after 1971, thanks to Richard Nixon's attempts to curb inflation with a 10% duty on imports, and stopping the conversion of US dollars to gold, which indirectly caused the German Deutschmark value to rise significantly. Sales outside the US weren't improving either, as concerns about the Beetle's safety also cut into sales. It was becoming very clear that Volkswagen's survival meant replacing the once iconic Beetle. However, the next Volkswagen to reach American shores was not the Rabbit, but instead it was
the Thing!
Yes, it was called the Thing in America, and was based on a military vehicle made for the German Army between 1970 and 1979. But in America, it was only imported for 2 years, from 1973 to 74. The replacement for the Beetle in 1974 would come in the form of a subcompact that shared next to nothing with the Beetle. Volkswagen's ownership of Auto Union, which later became Audi, had the expertise Volkswagen needed to switch from the rear-engine, rear-wheel drive, air-cooled Beetle to a new transversely mounted, front-engine, front-wheel drive, water-cooled subcompact. The overall design of the car, however, was not from Audi, but instead was the work of Italian designer Giorgetto Giugiaro. The new car's name was the Golf, or more specifically, the Golf Mark I. The Mark, or MK moniker, has continued to be associated with Volkswagen to indicate its generation, all the way until the recording of this video in 2021, with the Mark VIII that started in 2019. Prior to the Golf, Giugiaro also helped design 2 other Volkswagens, the Passat and the Scirocco, the latter sharing the same platform as the Golf, although arguably his most famous design was the DeLorean DMC-12. The Golf Mark I first started production in Germany in March of 1974, with imports to America starting in 1975, and it was clear from the start that the name Golf simply would not work in the United States. The common thinking is that the name Golf came from the German word Golfstrom, or Gulf Stream in English, but Americans would instead think it referred to the game of golf, which was a sport not typically played by the expected young thrifty buyers of this car.
You know, I've often thought of becoming a golf club.
So instead, they named it the Rabbit, to emphasize that it was a small and nimble car. Soon after its arrival in America, Chrysler executives were so intrigued by the Rabbit's design that they purchased 100 copies so that they could reverse engineer it. The end result was a Dodge Omni and Plymouth Horizon, launched in 1978, with more than a passing resemblance to the Rabbit. Although the Golf could be had with a 1.1-liter 50-horsepower four-cylinder, the Rabbit offered 1.6-liter fours, making around 70 horsepower, and by 1977 it was also available with a 1.5-liter diesel. These engines were never intended to be confused with sports cars, although later models definitely would. More on that later. Initial sales of the Rabbit were okay, but the added costs associated with importing it from Germany weren't helping. To lower the cost, Volkswagen made the then landmark decision to manufacture the Rabbit in America, making them the first foreign automaker to build cars in the United States. Well, almost the first, as English car maker Rolls-Royce had a plant in Massachusetts in the 1920s, but the Volkswagen move was much more significant in terms of volume. However, instead of building a new plant, Volkswagen spent $250 million, along with a $40 million loan from the state of Pennsylvania, to refurbish an old Chrysler plant in the town of New Stanton. Chrysler started building the plant in 1968, but their own financial difficulties at the time forced them to abandon it by 1970, before it was ever completed. In addition to the $40 million loan, the state of Pennsylvania offered Volkswagen an incentive package of over $100 million to improve the infrastructure around the plant and offered a property tax exemption, so clearly the state was willing to do whatever it took to make the site viable again. The first Rabbits rolled off the line in Westmoreland on April 10, 1978. The plant's manager was James McLernan, a former Chevrolet engineer. Having an American managing the production meant that the Rabbit had changes to meet what they considered to be American preferences, with softer suspension, different color schemes, and cheaper materials. The Rabbit also had its headlights switched to square units instead of the round lights on the Golf. Another Americanization of the Rabbit was offering it as a pickup, starting in the 1980 model year and lasting until 1983. The pickup would continue to be built in Yugoslavia after 1983 as the VW Caddy.
The Caddy! Where's the Caddy?
The Germans, as well as Volkswagen fans in America, didn't appreciate the changes being made in the American-built Rabbits. They started referring to the Rabbit as being Malibu-ized, which definitely was not a compliment.
A Volkswagen Rabbit?
The Malibu-ized Rabbits were only sold in the US, as Canadians continued to import it from Germany, at least until 1981. If you still wanted your Rabbit built in Germany, you could, starting in 1980, as long as you wanted the Cabriolet. At least that is the name it was called in Europe, as in America, it was named the Rabbit Convertible. Unlike the American-built Rabbit, the convertible maintained the round headlamps of the German Golf, and continued to be sold in America as the Rabbit Convertible until 1985, and later renamed to just Cabriolet, dropping the Rabbit name entirely. With sales not improving as much as hoped, changes were made in 1981 on the American-built Rabbit with a facelift in both the front and back, and by 1983, the Westmoreland plant switched back to stiffer shocks and higher quality trim that more closely resembled its German-built counterpart. But what the car really needed was a boost in power. The result was the introduction in America to the Rabbit GTI in 1982 for the 1983 model year. Canadian buyers were able to purchase GTIs from Germany starting back in 1979, but they got the American version when they started importing all Rabbits from America. Enthusiasts could easily spot a GTI from a distance, with the added air dam in the front, wider tires, blacked out molding and bumpers, the red trim around the grille, and of course, the prominent GTI badging. Under the hood of the GTI was a new 1.8-liter 4 making 90 horsepower. While that may sound weak by today's standards, this engine in such a tiny car introduced America to what a hot hatch could be. Its 0 to 60 times were almost 2 seconds faster than the standard Rabbit, and almost a second faster than the 5-liter 4-speed Trans Am available back then. By the way, that 0 to 60 time in the GTI was almost 10 seconds, which again sounds slow compared to cars today, but it was revolutionary almost 40 years ago. Despite the addition of the GTI model, sales of all Rabbit models continued to fall. The last Rabbit was built at the Westmoreland plant in 1984, and the plant was retooled to build the Golf Mark II. But that investment was short-lived, with continued losses in sales forcing the plant to close in 1988. Despite the ultimate failure of the Rabbit, Volkswagen would find more success with cars such as the Jetta, Passat, and Scirocco, and later with the new Beetle. And yes, the word new was actually part of the model name. The infamous emission scandal of 2015 severely tarnished Volkswagen's name, but they are still a huge influence in the car industry, with the Volkswagen Group owning Audi, Bentley, Bugatti, Lamborghini, and Porsche. Some of those cars are built in America, a trend that started thanks to the little car they called the Rabbit. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, click the like button and subscribe to my channel. If you once owned a car from the 80s to mid-2000s that you rarely see today and would like it featured in a future episode, leave a reply in the comments or contact me at the email shown here. See you next time.
Hey, where's my keg?